Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Brussels, probably for many of you, and welcome back to our monthly Look Ahead series, and the first one of 2025. I hope that you all had a restorative and enjoyable break ahead of what is likely to be a pretty intense year, I think. And as many of you know, as those of you who are returning know, we do this each month. At the beginning of the month, we look ahead at the month that's coming up, and the salient sort of things that are happening in EU regulatory, EU public affairs and in advocacy. And with our experts provide you advice and insight into how you can have the most impactful month, where to focus your attention, how to focus your attention, and what you can do, and some tips and tricks. So we are really happy that the audience for this series is growing. So and any new audience members this month, welcome, and we hope that you find it valuable and that you will come back next month as well and throughout the year. My name is Michel. I'm the co-founder and one of the co-founders and the CEO of Lanzcape, which is a new and revolutionary app in that we provide advice for people who are on the coalface of advocacy, for advocacy teams, helping to professionalize and level up the entire practice, and to empower people doing advocacy work on the front lines to act as quickly and efficiently and impactfully as possible. I will be very happy to tell you more about that. Just contact me outside of this meeting, and I would be delighted to talk to you about that more. For this series, we are really lucky and privileged to have two of the leading advocacy practice experts in Brussels and in fact in the world, Dr. Alan Hardacre and Dr. Paul Shotton, who they together are co-founders of a groundbreaking advocacy consultancy called AdvocacyStrategy, which I won't get into too much here, but it too is changing the way things are done in our world. Please feel free to get in touch with them about that. But they also, this is really within their wheelhouse, will be telling you how to use your time in the most efficient and impactful way in the month ahead. And so with that, I will hand over to you, Alan. And
great. Thank you very much, Michel, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year. It's great to be back in this series here of the month ahead. So if we go forward a slide, Michelle, I'm hoping that's moving. Yep. Yes. So what we are going to do with you today, as usual, is basically take you through the key institutional milestones. So we're going to look across the Commission, the Parliament and the Council. We're also then going to have a look more broadly into the Brussels environment, what is happening in the month of January, and then just maybe remind ourselves of what this means from a more structured public affairs perspective. So if we go to the key institutional milestones, for those of you who were with us in December at the webinar, you will know we always give some sort of top tips of what's the key focus of the month. The December checklist had 3 items on it. So if you may remember, it may feel like a long time ago, pre-New Year and Christmas, but it was the start of the new European Commission that came into office in December. It was the hurried end of the Hungarian presidency as they tried to close off as many files as they could. And from an internal perspective, it was basically, we were flagging that it was still a preparation phase, mapping commission teams, the new commissioners and their new cabinet, also some of the musical chairs taking place in the commission. These were all things that were flagged as key for everybody to know and work with in December. However, now, if we move forwards to January, what is happening in January? Well, effectively, in many ways, we will show you there are quite a few things happening, but at the big level from a public affairs perspective, there are not that many things happening. The biggest point, 2 points, first of all, is probably one, the transition to not just the start of the Polish presidency, but in fact the start of the new trio of presidency, that is Poland, Denmark, and Cyprus. So Denmark, who come in the on the 1st of July. So basically, we're now moving to Poland for 6 months, and then we're moving to the Danish presidency. So the Polish presidency, it will run, as I say, for those 6 months. They have outlined their vision for the Polish presidency. You can find a lot of this online, of course. They want to go on the political offensive. They want to have some reflection time. They are talking about the concept of proactive security, be that military and internal security, be that economic and energy security, food and health security, or information security. Just as a point of interest for those of you who follow these things closely, obviously the rotating presidency comes around roughly every 13.5 years. So Poland last had the presidency in 2011. So they now pick up the reins again in a very different world. So also for Poland, very particular focus on war and peace on the eastern EU borders. And I'm sure they will bring that to the front during their 6-month presidency. They have also outlined the agenda. So all of the meetings have been published, what they are going to do, when they're going to do it. They have scheduled in 22 informal meetings in the first 6 months of the year. In fact, almost in the first 5 months of the year. That's actually quite a lot of informal meetings, just so we're clear. These are then going to be informal meetings to discuss many of the topics that will come out of the work programme, which we're going to come to in a second, but also of the priorities of the Polish presidency. So plenty to be looking at and preparing when it comes to the Polish presidency. And so I guess what we would put forward as advice, the main top line element for January that will come across is this is probably the last 4 weeks of relative peace you will have in 2025. Why? Because as Paul will tell you in a second, the Commission is scheduling to publish its 2025 work programme a little later than usual, but Paul will explain why in early February, at which point, generally speaking, all hell breaks loose for you internally with your members, your organisation, and then the workflows that kick off. So any of the work that you should be doing now from an advice perspective, familiarising yourself here, we put the presidency priorities and aligning with that, but more broadly, you have 3 or 4 weeks really to get your foundation set for how you're going to deal with things in the coming months, because it is going to get busy very, very quickly. So maybe we hold off no more. Paul can jump in and start to tell us about what is going to be happening with the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Alan. Yes, just taking control now. So indeed, yes, the European Commission is in its final stages with the Work Programme 2025 right now. We, of course, have been waiting a long time for this process, and we have to be a little bit more patient until the beginning of February to see the official publication of the Commission Work Programme for the coming year. As that process unfolds, of course, we're still having to show patience now for the beginning of new legislative initiatives, which will be coming in. And of course, with that will come an increase in activity around preparing and analysing these legislative proposals. At the same time, we've seen a little bit of activity now with the new commissioners starting up meetings and calls. We've seen commissioners heading out to the World Trade Organization and meetings being done as well in Brussels with foreign delegations. So most of the work, of course, is done for the work programme. So it's really no longer a case of trying to influence it so much as to track the process, the last final steps leading to its publication and approval by the college. If we want to look a little bit more in depth, there have been some leaks as usual, and we see that the work programme is for the next year certainly is looking to be articulated around these 3 key areas: competitiveness, reflecting the reports, the Draghi report, as well as for the pharmaceutical sector and migration, key issues for the coming period. We see under the competitiveness expectations for a publication of a proposal around a competitiveness fund, a new competitiveness act, as well as some strategic documents around the competitiveness compass. The legislatives, the pharmaceutical sector itself will have major legislation around the Critical Medicines Act, reflecting the policy issues of the last years, as well as potentially a small concern around the Danish presidency upcoming, and of course, the significant influence of its own pharmaceutical industry and the very successful Novo Nordisk at the time. Migration as well is going to be looked at with a recast, looking at indeed new legislation to tackle migration in the coming period. So we have this already preliminary insight that can help us starting our preparations for the work program in the coming year. And of course, in parallel, we're also seeing the handover yesterday to the new Trump presidency with the certification of the votes in the US Congress, and of course, upcoming elections in Germany as well, framing some of these major policy initiatives from the European Commission in the coming year. So what to do, of course? Well, like we mentioned, emphasis is now turning around to looking at what will be published and what has not been published and making preparatory steps to deal with those things. So, of course, all around the priorities that we've just emphasized, there's a lot of activity there that can be done around gathering intelligence to better understand and look at these draft proposals that are sitting within the European Commission, their current state, their current impact on your organization, and of course, formulating some priorities for your organization around what you would like to achieve in the coming year on those dossiers and those issues. To that, of course, efforts can be already put into looking at your communication materials and your stakeholder mappings, looking to sharpen those materials in relation to these proposals, looking at the services within the Commission, looking at the working parties as well. So bringing in some extra levels of detail to your mappings that have already been updated, looking at, of course, the new Commission and the new Parliament. Once, of course, these are published, like I mentioned before, you really need to think about the impact of these issues. So look, of course, at prioritizing and allocating the resources to those files, and of course, rebalancing your files with existing dossiers that have been carried over from the last mandate. And of course, if your file is not in the work program for 25, then it's already time to start looking at the drafting phase within the Commission, looking to the services, looking to the consultations that will be done and the impact assessments, and of course, preparing to engage with those processes with a view to, of course, strengthening the probability of it being tabled in 26, and of course, increasing your input into those processes. The earlier, the better, of course. So prioritize, of course, focusing and engaging with the Commission's cabinet and the Parliament and the working groups, and of course, aligning with the relevant DGs for these key issues that will be coming up and published, of course, early next month. So, of course, we have some repetition here as we are still waiting for the Commission to publish its work program, but there is still now already a little bit more insight into what is going to be coming up for the next year and where the emphasis will be. So I think I will stop there and maybe hand over to Alan to talk a little bit about Parliament.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so we move on from the Commission. As where Paul says, we are very much now waiting for the work programme. Over the road in the European Parliament, the month ahead is one in which we have one plenary session, one special EP Holocaust Remembrance Day, and 2 committee weeks. So if we break that down a little bit, the plenary session is notable for some of the things that will happen, and it's also noticeable for something that will not happen. So what will happen in the plenary session on the 21st is the Polish presidency will arrive, will present its priorities to the plenary. We also expect during the month of January and into February that then various Polish ministers will appear in different committees to start discussions about priorities as relates to the different committees. So look out for that starting to happen. Otherwise, the plenary is going to be somewhat focused on the EU neighbourhood, with Belarus, the Middle East and Serbia all invited to participate. There's going to be some discussions of rule of law. Some of the conclusions from the European Council meeting of the 19th of December will be discussed in the plenary. So a lot of high-level issues, priorities, strategic forward-looking discussions. But notably, as the plenary agenda looks today, and please note that plenary agendas can change until the last minute, there are no OLP files on the January plenary, which is obviously a reflection of where we are in the cycle, that there is very little legislation, certainly in the plenary stage. So in some ways, a relatively light plenary session. That then falls back down into the committees as well, of course. Now, many committees are dealing with carryover files, as Paul mentioned. The committees will also likely, during the 2 weeks that they have of meetings in January, likely to meet again with the commissioners to start discussing policy priorities and some planned initiatives, although those conversations are extremely difficult without the publication of the work programme, because of course we're all going to be staying very high level. So it's literally the lack of the work programme from the Commission in January means that the Parliament is also very much treading water, basically. So it's dealing with other business, admin business, routine business. It's going to discuss things in the committees like the annual report on the implementation of foreign and security policy, human rights and democracy. So not unimportant topics, but clearly you can see not legislative topics. So if we look at, okay, what are we doing? What would our advice be to you for the month ahead in the European Parliament? Again, it's very similar, but now we're getting to a more fine-tuned state than previous months in terms of your preparation. So basically making sure that when it comes to the European Parliament, you have now captured all of the new MEPs, you understand the committees and the MEPs and some of the political dynamics that are shaping up in the committees. You have all of this, that you have basically, at a more general level, as Paul said, talking about your messages, your objectives, making sure that you have got your structure and process in place, ready to go for when things become live as of publication of the work programme. Because the moment that work programme comes back, and I can assure you we will have plenty more to say about this in February, that is when you are going to start to have to look at, of course, trying to potentially influence the rapporteurships of different key files, getting your information out of the Parliament, setting up meetings. And of course, that is all going to be a competitive space. So the more prepared you are now, as usual, the better. So with perhaps a continued theme along this line, I will hand back to Paul to tell you about the councils.
Thanks very much, Alan. Yeah, so the council, indeed, I think the main point, of course, here will be to be looking at the Polish presidency and its priorities for the coming period. So I'll take a moment just to review some of the main ones and how they reflect, of course, the new realities in the current years. So military and external security, of course, are high on the agenda for the Polish priorities, and they want to, of course, as you've seen, continue to strongly support Ukraine and the European defense industry. Coupled to that, of course, is energy security as a high priority for the Polish presidency, looking to reduce reliance on Russian gas, of course, and accelerating that energy transition. We have economic security, strengthening cohesion policy, food and climate security, with a focus, of course, on agricultural competitiveness in the context of climate change, health and medicine, information security, in particular, again, linking back to this new geopolitical context, combating disinformation, cybersecurity, and finally, of course, artificial intelligence, which will be a major file. So we can see, of course, that the Polish presidency is reflecting very much the security context in Central and Eastern Europe in its priorities, as well as, of course, some of the high-level concerns around artificial intelligence and new technologies. So that will be, of course, driving the Polish presidency agenda in the working groups and the setting of priorities for the trio in the coming 6 months. and of course guiding a lot of the work within the working parties, co-repair, and as well the council meetings. So as we mentioned before, the preparatory bodies are already starting to look at some of the files and continuing work on some of the files that were carried over. And we can expect them, of course, to take up more substantial work in February as new proposals are added to the already existing working list. I mentioned before already the elections and the major milestones in the United States, in particular with the certification of the US election, and of course, Donald Trump taking one step closer to the White House, as well as elections in Ireland right now in the upper house of Parliament. So the Polish priorities of the presidency are, of course, one of the key factors that we need to look at as we want to sort of develop and shape our strategies. So start work, of course, monitoring the working parties to look at the agendas and checking how work progresses within those parties on existing files, and be prepared, of course, to engage on the new files. Look, of course, at the new work program priorities that we've been looking at in the earlier slides, and expect these to be translated then and aligned with the Polish presidency's priorities. You should already, of course, have mapped the presidencies and the Perm Rep in particular, as well as the ministries and the experts within the national ministries. And of course, you should begin to engage and establish relations with them in Brussels, as well as back home in Poland. Don't underestimate the influence of Poland. It has been, kicking above its weight for many years now, and its influence should be felt, in particular around the shaping of the work program as it is published, and of course the engagement of the council's preparatory bodies on those files. And of course, keep an eye out for the upcoming Danish presidency. There should be quite a difference as well in terms of priorities. When we look at pharmaceutical legislation, like we mentioned earlier, the Danish presidency will, of course, be to a degree shaped by its own national interests, in particular by Novo Nordisk's priorities and importance for the economy. So indeed, there is still a little bit of a holding in terms of what is happening within the council, though we are seeing some uptake in activities. And as I mentioned before, this is now the opportunity, if you haven't done so already, to really focus on establishing relations with the Polish presidency and reaching out to the Perm Reps in particular, identifying the attaches, making sure that you have the right briefing materials ready, and of course ensuring that you have contact with not only the Polish presidency, but the key member states on your issues and files. And of course, aligning the work program that we have seen of the Commission with the member states and your mappings on that level. And maybe one last note is, of course, to consider very carefully how you coordinate your activities at the national level, whether that is through your national business units or whether your national trade associations, preparing already for engaging not just with the presidency, but with key member states on these files, and ensuring that you have a way of transmitting messages, not just in Brussels, but through your networks at the national level. And so that really sums up the council for the coming month. And of course, we will have a much more exciting month in February. And if I hand over to you, Alan, again, maybe you want to continue with the last slides.
Yes, great. Thank you, Paul. So yes, indeed, back in January, I'm sure everybody is delighted to be back this wonderful week. So where is the focus? I think a few elements, some of which are now slightly repetitive, but I think it's important to repeat what is key. So first of all, obviously checking in on anything you did in December, any follow-up that's required from any December work meetings you had. That's the first thing, or maybe you have a bit of a rolling list of stakeholders that you were reaching out to, and maybe you're continuing through that process. Then all good. Of course, checking in on anything that happened over the break, using your monitoring service or just having a dig around to make sure you haven't missed anything. And then, of course, what we have stressed several times is the preparation. So continuing to prepare in the background your structures, processes, and documents ready for when you're going to need them. So to make that very concrete, I suspect everybody, organization, trade association, NGO, no matter what, is going to be asked to give their organization very quickly some form of brief on the work program when it comes out. So maybe you can already get ahead of this with some templates. You are then very quickly, I suspect, then going to have to create some timelines for issues that are in there when they're going to happen. And then as you roll down, you're going to have to start doing a number of things that are triggered by that process. And of course, as Paul said, if your issue is not in the work program and it's something you wish proactively to take forward, then of course you should then start thinking immediately about how you engage to get that in work program 2026. So of course, there's a lot of things going to be triggered by that moment. So the question is, how much can you prepare now for what is coming later? So that is basically where we are as we come back. If we look at what else is happening this month in January, to be honest, it's a relatively quiet month. It's the beginning of the different conferences and events that will start. But of course, once we have a firm policy agenda, the number of events will multiply, which will lead you to making some choices about where you wish to be, maybe events you wish to hold yourself. But for the month ahead, there is a European Space Conference, a Data Protection Day, a 5G conference, and an EU Open Source Policy Summit. Okay, so a different number of events. These are just some of the main highlight events that we wanted to flag to you. There are, of course, others. This is not an exhaustive list, but notably, and I stress again, as of February, the number of events, once we have a policy agenda, will multiply. And again, maybe you want to be in that mix and have some events of your own. Now, if we move on a little bit in terms of, okay, what do we advise when it comes to these other developments? Well, I guess what we would advise is, keeping an eye on all of the different events, making sure that you have some way of capturing all of the different events that are happening so that you can find out where you need to be or where you need to get a note from, either because it's information or you need to do some networking. And the ability to then use these to start dialogues around any issues that are important to you. So again, something else from a more planning and reflection perspective. So I guess if we land on what we would suggest is the January checklist. So the first key item that I think we've probably flagged is this switch of presidencies. Although, as you probably picked up, January is a treading water month. So the Polish presidencies come in, they're outlining lots of top line priorities. They won't really be able to get into the action of that until the month of February. But nonetheless, it's an opportunity for you to take note of the change, maybe start looking ahead to the Danish presidency. We would always advise you to be looking one presidency ahead at all times. So if you are thinking of what you should do proactively now, engagement and thinking ahead for the Danish presidency would be a very good idea. Of course, it's a funny thing to put on a checklist as an item, but the item is just wait for the work program. We are sure that there will be more leaks in the coming weeks, so you can put together a more comprehensive picture until the work program itself comes out. Currently scheduled on the 11th of February, as Paul said, which is a plenary week in Strasbourg. So that is going to be a big and heavy week for a lot of people. And then, of course, what has become clear through this is further preparations from your stakeholder mapping, preparations for your 2025 milestones, your 2025 timelines, much of which may be a little bit blank at the moment as you wait for things to become clear, and that you then subsequently fill in. And then in a more immediate sense, from a preparation perspective, what are the briefings and the notes and the emails and the alerts that you're going to send around the work program? How are you going to prioritize what comes out of it? How's that going to fit into your workflow? Give this as much thought as you can in advance, and it will likely save you a little bit of time and a little bit of pain when you come to that moment in February. So as we do every month, we just round off by, as a reminder in terms of structured public affairs is good public affairs. As we highlight here, there's different aspects of your work, from prioritizing the data and the insights to get your clear objectives and KPIs, everything around your situational analysis and monitoring so that you've got all of the right information at hand to develop assets and take decisions, which leads then to your position papers, your stakeholder mapping, and your alliance selection, which then leads to you formulating strategies, annual plans, documents that you will use internally and to guide your work. Then your direct engagement and outreach tactics that you wish to do yourself as an organization, or those that are then done indirectly, so either through, for example, trade associations, consultants, think tanks, etc. And then the ability for you to evaluate and measure what you have achieved, how you've achieved it, and why you've achieved it, and how this feeds into your world of internal reporting. So as we start 2025, there's probably an element of making sure that you have done an effective evaluation and measurement of everything that you did in 2024, so you're prepared to learn and adapt effectively for this year. Otherwise, as we keep noting, we're probably still in the preparatory phases of priorities, making sure that the situation analysis and your monitoring is right, that your position papers are or your other assets, even if you don't have any content to them, that you have agreed templates and processes in place ready for when you're going to need them. So hopefully we will then be able to come back and give you much more and much more exciting detail in the month of February. So with that, Michelle, I will hand back to you. Michelle, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, both of you, for that. I think really fantastic survey of the month. In spite of you're having said a few times that it's going to be a somewhat calmer month than the ones we're looking at subsequently. I think it's really great to set people up with this level of confidence in where they should be focusing their energies and attention. I do have, if we have time, I've received a couple of questions. So could we hit those quickly, guys?
Sure.
Okay. So one was, the first one was, you mentioned, I think it was you, Alan, you mentioned once the work program does come out, influencing the rapporteurships, and can you say a little bit more about how one might go about trying to approach that, or even just start that process? You see your issue, as I'm interpreting here the question a little bit now, but I guess you see your issue appearing on the work program, and you're like, okay, I want to have some influence on who gets assigned this file. Where do I start?
Sure. Okay. So this is quite a complex process, okay, and it requires some pretty good relationships. But if you have a file coming up and you think actually it would be great if certain MEPs were the rapporteur, I think you need to have a good enough relationship, or at least the confidence to be able to actually have a direct conversation with them in which you could indicate that you believe, or maybe you do this through a third party, that they could or should, in fact, are they considering putting themselves forward to be the rapporteur, and maybe articulating reasons why this would be good for them. Of course, that you would have to frame in terms of their political visibility and success. You may also wish to do that more towards the political group, because of course the first thing that needs to happen for the distribution of rapporteurships is the political group needs to bid and be assigned the file. So normally that would come from pressure from MEPs internal to the group saying, actually, we think this is a priority, we would like to take it forward. So here, the key people that you would have in mind for this would be the assigned coordinator for the committee in which the file will drop, and then the key MEP or MEPs who you think within that group could be potential rapporteurs. No harm in sounding them out, making the suggestion. If nothing else, you're establishing a relationship and getting some information. This is the general way that most people go about trying to influence the assignment of rapporteurships. It's gentle nudge lobbying.
Super. Thank you very much. The next question I got was, you mentioned key member outside of the member state that holds the presidency, other key member states on a given issue. Would you have any particular recommendations beyond sort of, I mean, we all have our intuitions, right? You give an issue and you can sort of imagine at least a couple of member states in any given case who might take a particular interest. Would you have any other recommendations of a more systematic approach or a research-based approach to that, so you can figure out, you sort of support your intuition with some research or system as to which member states should be considered key? Paul, I think this is relating to something.
I was gonna jump in. I was just waiting to see. When it comes to, I think, when you're looking at the trios and the upcoming presidencies in particular, I think, a lot of it draws down to your mapping activities as at the heart of it. So having a good understanding of the key actors within the permanent representations on your issue, within the current presidency and the upcoming presidencies, and establishing, of course, relationships with them. From my experience, it's very much also about looking at the comitology process and looking at the key experts and representatives of the member states within those committees, as the implementation also very much couples to the work within the working parties, and often the same experts are present in both. So in that sense, really, it's about understanding, of course, who are the actors and the attaches and the national experts, as well as the more senior actors within the permanent representations. And then, of course, classifying them according to their level of support for the issues that you're working on, and trying to really create a strategic understanding of who is supportive and who is, of course, influential over the process. And it's not just about votes, it's also about level of commitment to the issue. So maybe for the previous question, I would have also just colored what Alan said with the idea, of course, of thinking about your champions in the parliament, the champions on those issues, MEPs who really have invested and committed to forwarding those issues and forwarding your positions. And the same can then be said for member states. So in my experience, many smaller member states may also be prepared to commit significant energy and resources to supporting your organization and sharing information with you as well. So I guess that would be my general response to that question. Maybe Alan wants to add something?
Yeah, if I just add to that, and I'm just going to second what you just said, Paul. My experience, the best experiences I've ever had in trying to engage with the council has been with smaller member states, simply because they have had the capacity, the engagement. They haven't been getting 5,000 phone calls like the presidency will be getting every week, like the larger member states get. So it's always been a case of actually trying to create the rule of thumb for the council tends to be you want to have 3 good contacts in a room where there's a meeting. And they don't have to be people you're trying to influence. They can just be people who can give you some sort of readout of what's happening. Because, of course, nearly everything that happens in the council is behind closed doors and is not made public. So I would suggest that you look among the smaller member states just to find people who have got an interest in the issue, who are willing to engage and meet with you, and with whom you can build a good, trusted relationship. That can be worth its weight in gold.
Fantastic. Super. Okay. Thank you very much. We have one more. I'm going to try to fit one more question in. And it actually carries on quite nicely to what the last thing we've just been discussing here. It's another nuance on that, I would even say. So the question is, if what you get back, you're trying to get a meeting with the presidency, or you're trying to have contact, and what you're getting back is they're too busy to meet you. And this is in the question. It says even well-known cross-sectoral organizations. What would your advice be for how to overcome this barrier? So what you're being told is we're too busy. How do you get through that or around that?
Maybe I can start, but a couple of suggestions. Of course, it's a difficult situation, but what we just mentioned before, of course, with the trio. So think to the next presidency. I mean, a lot of what will be tabled now will be still very much relevant to the Danish presidency. So if the Polish is more difficult for your organization to access, start preparing and engaging with the Danish presidency. I would also sort of suggest to think about key gatekeepers within the perm reps and within the member states, so trying to identify those actors that will then be able to facilitate access to the people you need to meet. So thinking about more senior representatives, thinking about people within the national ministries who can maybe facilitate and open doors for you to those meetings that you're trying to have. And maybe a last comment would be, and from my experience, is of course identifying those events. We're in a bit of a quiet period, but there will be lots of events around the presidency, and attending, certainly in my experience, attending those events is an excellent way to establish contact with those key members of the Polish presidency, for example, the key civil servants, not just, of course, of the presidency, but from all the member states. So, identify those conferences on those legislative proposals and make sure you're present and that you network with the right people there. I don't know if there's something to add, Alan.
Yeah, I'll just add three quick suggestions. So, but first of all, I would say it really is not unusual to not get a meeting with the presidency. That is completely standard practice. If you really want to get the meeting, my three suggestions would be create the opportunity. So can you have a roundtable discussion? Can you facilitate something to which they're invited, which is interesting enough for them to actually come? Secondly, leverage another member state who will find it much easier to get a meeting with them. So you may not be in the room, but at least you're going to leverage a conversation that you need. Or thirdly, is there any form of Polish partner that you can work with or use to maybe facilitate that contact? So there'll be just three further ideas for you.
Fantastic, super. Well, thank you very much, Alan and Paul. Once again, this seems like an incredibly valuable 45 minutes. And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope it has been valuable to you. And please join us again. Keep an eye out. We will be doing this at the beginning of each month. So we will be posting this on LinkedIn and also notifying our existing audience by email. So keep an eye out for that. If more questions occur to you about the content today or about anything else, don't hesitate to email any of us. We work together and we'll handle the questions between us. Info@landscape.com is one good place, or info@advocacystrategy.com. So send questions, and we will be sharing the recording of this. And so don't worry about it if you didn't get all the notes you wanted. The recording will be made available to you. And with that, thanks again, and see you in about a month, and have a fantastic January.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good month. Bye.
Hi, everyone.